Picture your closet. Not a grand one. The ordinary closet a few steps from wherever you're lying right now. Now empty it. Take away every piece of clothing you did not make with your own two hands, every shirt you didn't stitch, every sock you didn't knit, every seam you didn't sew by candlelight with a needle you are genuinely afraid of losing. Take away everything cut from cloth you didn't weave yourself, from thread you didn't spin yourself, from a plant you didn't pull out of your own field with your own aching back. Count what's left. For almost every American alive tonight, the number is 0. Now run the same test in the other direction. Stand in a farmhouse bedroom in 1780 and remove everything homemade. The bed is stripped bare. The sheets were spun in that very room. The blanket goes, carded and spun and woven and shrunk tight by the women of the house. The husband's shirts go, all 3 of them. The baby's gowns, the towels, the grain sacks in the barn. In most American households in 1780, if you took away everything made by the hands of the women who lived there, you would be left with a man's Sunday coat, perhaps a few precious imported handkerchiefs, and a great deal of bare wood. That is the world we're visiting tonight. A world that smelled of wet flax and tallow smoke, where cloth was so valuable that stealing a petticoat off a hedge could get you whipped in the public square, and where one plain linen shirt, one, represented more hours of human labour than most of us now give our jobs in a month. A world where nearly every woman you passed on the road, rich or poor, carried in her fingertips a set of skills handed down, mother to daughter, without a single break in the chain, for something like 8,000 years. And then, inside one long human lifetime, the chain ended. Not the way empires end, with fire and proclamations. It ended quietly, purchase by purchase, in parlours and pattern counters and department store fitting rooms, so quietly that almost nobody noticed it happening, and today almost nobody can tell you when it happened. Ask around, you'll get a shrug. Sometime after the covered wagons, sometime before the shopping mall. Here is the strange and rather wonderful part. We actually know. This particular revolution left a paper trail. Patents with dates stamped on them, price lists, army ledgers, magazine columns, catalogue pages, court transcripts, and the household account books of women who wrote down every skein they spun. The question in tonight's title, when exactly did American women stop sewing their own clothes, has a real answer, not a single date. It happened in stages, garment by garment, class by class, and every stage can be pinned to its own decade like a moth to a board. Men's clothing fell first, and we know when. Then one particular piece of women's clothing broke through, and we know when, and we know what it cost. Then dresses, then the long stubborn holdouts. By the end of tonight you will have every date. And I'll be honest with you at each step about which numbers come from account books and which come from advertisements, because those are 2 very different kinds of true. So, I make these history stories, and after all this time I honestly could not tell you whether anyone genuinely sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who find it profoundly calming to learn exactly how many hours of a woman's life one linen shirt swallowed in 1780. No judgment is the way. Subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. One honest thing before the wheel starts turning, because this channel runs on your trust. The dates in tonight's story are real. The machines, the prices, the patents, the strike, the fire, the government measuring project, real, documented, checkable. But the hands I'm going to lend you along the way, the farm wife, the young mother at the machine demonstration, the shop girl holding her first store-bought blouse. Those are composites, stitched together from diaries, letters, and household books, because history carefully recorded what these women made and almost never recorded their days. The rooms are real, the eyes are borrowed. When something is a guess, I will say so. That's the deal, same as always. It is a Monday morning in October of 1780 in the Connecticut River Valley, and the first thing you notice, the thing you would notice, stepping into this kitchen out of your own century, is the smell. Tallow first, sharp and animal, from the rushlights and the candle stubs, then wood ash, settled into everything, into the floorboards and your hair and the bread, then wet wool, because there is always wet wool drying somewhere, hung on pegs by the fire, and it smells like a damp dog that has opinions. And underneath all of it, faint and green and a little rotten, the smell of flax, river water and decay, because part of you has smelled of retted flax for so many years that you no longer know you smell of it at all. You are 31 years old. Your name, for tonight, is Hannah. You have 4 living children, a husband named Elias, who is somewhere down the valley with the militia 3 days out of every 20, and a mother-in-law named Mercy, who is 66, half blind in one eye, and still spins a finer thread than you ever will. She reminds you of this roughly once a week, not unkindly, just accurately. And this morning you have a problem, which is the only reason anyone's day ever gets remembered. 2 problems, actually, and both of them are made of cloth. The first, the town meeting has voted its levy for the Continental Army, the way towns across New England have been doing all through this war, and your household share is 2 shirts and 2 pairs of stockings, due at the meeting house by Saturday. That part is real, by the way. The army that fought the revolution were clothed to a remarkable degree by assessments like this one. Town by town, farm by farm, shirt by shirt, because Congress had no money and the mills of England were on the other side of the war. When the soldiers at Morristown shivered, committees in little towns wrote numbers next to family names. Yours has a 2 next to it, twice. The second problem, on Friday, Elias caught his one good work shirt on a harrow tine and tore it from the shoulder halfway to the hem, and the frost is coming, and a man cannot get through a Connecticut winter on one aging shirt, and one Sunday shirt he is not allowed to sweat in. So this is shirt week. 3 shirts by Saturday, cut from the linen in the press upstairs. And to understand what that sentence costs, you have to understand what that linen is, because you did not buy it. There was almost nowhere to buy it if you wanted to. Not this year, not with the ports strangled and imported cloth scarce and dear when it appears at all. No. The linen in the press began, 16 months ago, as a field. Hold that. 16 months. We're going to walk it quickly, the way you remember it, because you cannot look at a bolt of your own linen without seeing every one of those months folded up inside it. May of last year, 1779. Elias broadcast the flaxseed thick, because flax sown thick grows tall and thin and unbranched, which is what you want. The stalk is the crop. By midsummer it stood waist-high, with small blue flowers that lasted a single morning each, a field of blue that turned to green by noon, which is the sort of thing you'd stop and admire if you were not 31 with 4 children. July. Pulling week. Flax is not cut, it is pulled, roots and all, to save every inch of fibre, and pulling flax is stoop labour of the kind that writes itself into your lower back by the second hour. You and the children pulled and bundled and stood the sheaves to dry, and then you drew each handful through the ripple comb to strip off the seed bowls. Next year's seed and linseed oil besides. Nothing wasted, nothing ever wasted. Then the part the neighbours smell, retting. You laid the flax in the slow pool of the brook and weighted it with stones and let it rot, carefully, watchfully rot, for a week and more, until the gums holding fibre to stalk gave up. Pull it too early and the fibre won't come free. Leave it too late and the fibre itself rots and 16 months of linen dies in a farm brook. Mercy judged it, the way her mother judged it. She pulled a stalk, snapped it, peeled it, rolled the fibres between her fingers, and said one word, out. November, once the harvest was in, breaking. The flax brake is a heavy wooden jaw on legs, and you fed the dried stalks across it while Mercy slammed the arm down, over and over, cracking the woody core into splinters without cutting the soft fibre inside. It is loud, dull, bruising work. Your palms buzz for hours after, then scutching, beating and scraping the broken bits away with a wooden blade, then hackling. And here we meet the first object I want you to keep your eye on tonight. The hetchel, a bed of iron spikes mounted on a board, teeth sharp enough to draw blood and prove it regularly. You drag each handful of fibre through the coarse hetchel, then a finer one, then the finest, combing out the short tangled fibres, the tow, which becomes coarse cloth and stuffing and lamp wick, until what hangs from your fist is a switch of long flax fibres, pale grey gold, soft and cool as a horse's tail, linen before it is linen. Mercy calls a good strick of it by a name you love, line, as in lineage, as in line of descent. Nobody in the family knows any more whether the pun is intended. It doesn't matter. It's true either way. And then the winter. The spinning winter. Every winter of your life since you were 6 years old. And when I say spinning, I need you to understand what that means in a 1780 farmhouse, because it is not a craft corner. It is not a hobby shelf. Spinning is the background hum of female existence. There are 2 wheels in this house, and they are as ordinary as the kettle. The great wheel, remember it, it matters later, stands nearly as tall as you are, a wool wheel, walked at, not sat at. You give the rim a turn with a wooden peg in your right hand, step back 3 steps, drawing the yarn out long between your fingers as the spindle whirs, step forward to wind on, and do it again, and again. A woman spinning wool walks all day and goes nowhere. People who've measured it, this is a modern reconstruction, but careful one. Put a steady day at the great wheel at several miles of walking and a handful of skeins to show for it. Your legs know the number even if you never see it written. The flax wheel is the small one, the treadle wheel by the window, the one you sit at with the distaff dressed like a grey gold beehive at your shoulder, feet rocking, fingers wetted at your lips to smooth the thread. Which is why, Mercy says, you can tell a flax spinner by her chapped mouth. Linen thread wants damp. All winter, every winter, in the hour before breakfast and the 2 hours after supper and every scrap of daylight the other work leaves behind, the wheels turn. Your daughters spin tow on the great wheel. Betty is 9 and already steady. Prue is 7 and mostly enthusiastic. Mercy spins the fine line by feel now more than sight, and her thread is still smoother than yours, and once a week she mentions it, and once a week you let her, because she's 66 and it is the last contest she can still win. Here is the arithmetic nobody in this kitchen has ever bothered to write down, because it is simply the shape of life. Historians who have counted it out from account books and surviving cloth put it something like this. Enough linen shirting for a household means a woman and her daughters spinning through most of a winter. Hundreds of hours at the wheels before a single thread touches a loom. Call it 20 spinner hours folded into every yard of decent linen, give or take, depending on the fineness. A man's shirt takes 3.5 yards. You may do that multiplication whenever you're ready. The answer is why nothing made of cloth is ever thrown away in this house. The answer is why a torn shirt is a family event. In March, you carried the year's yarn down the valley to Mr. Chapin, the weaver. 'Cause your own loom is narrow, and your own weaving is honest but plain, and shirting for the levy should be even and tight. Chapin wove your thread into cloth at so much per yard, paid not in coin. There is barely any coin, and what there is this year of 1780 is continental paper collapsing so fast that people have started saying not worth a continental right out loud, but in flaxseed, cheese, and a day of Elias's ploughing. That is the economy you live in. Barter, credit in a neighbour's ledger, and trust with a long memory. And then April, and the part you secretly love, bleaching. Brown linen comes off the loom the colour of oatmeal, and the only bleach on sale in 1780 is sunlight. So you spread the new cloth on the south meadow grass, pegged against the wind, and for weeks you watered it with a dipper morning and evening, and the sun and the wet and the grass slowly drank the brown out of it. Grassing, it's called. By June the cloth was the colour of milk with the cream barely off, and you folded it into the press upstairs with lavender between the folds, and every time you passed it you felt what a rich man must feel walking past his strong box. Cloth is money. Cloth is 16 months. Cloth is time, folded flat. That is what you own this Monday morning in October 1780. That is what the war and the Harrow Tyne are asking you to spend. Mercy says grace over breakfast, shortest version, because Mondays. Bernice from the next farm has promised her afternoon to the work, and your sister may come Thursday. The children's porridge is eaten standing, and then the table is scrubbed, dried, and becomes what every kitchen table in America becomes whenever cloth needs cutting: sacred ground. Nobody sets so much as a spoon on it now. You fetch the shirting down and unfold it, and the smell of lavender and sunlight comes up off it, and I want to be honest with you the way I promised. What happens next would look, to modern eyes, almost insultingly simple, because a 1780 shirt is not fitted. It has no curved seams, no darts, no shaped armholes. It is geometry. A big rectangle folded at the shoulders for the body, 2 smaller rectangles for sleeves, squares under the arms for gussets, a strip for the collar, a strip for the cuffs. Not because these women could not cut curves, but because curves waste cloth, and you do not waste 16 months. Every scrap of the cutting that cannot go into the shirt goes into the scrap bag, and the scrap bag goes into quilts and patches and doll bodies, and at the very end of the line, paper, rag paper. The letters of the revolution are written on worn-out shirts. I'll say that again, because it may be the truest sentence in this whole chapter. The correspondence of the founders is written on the pulped remains of homespun laundry. Mercy cuts. You could cut it. You've cut shirts for 15 years, but Mercy's eye for squaring cloth by a drawn thread is the best in the parish, and there is an order to things. She pulls one weft thread clear across the width to mark a true line, cuts along the channel it leaves, and the sound of the shears through new linen is a sound you will want in your ears at the end of tonight. A low, grainy shear and whisper, like a spade in dry sand, very slow. Then the needles come out, and now I need you to slow down and feel this part, because this is the part the whole night turns on. A needle in 1780 is a manufactured marvel, English-made, bought from a peddler, kept in a bone case safe from rust and counted. Drop one between the floorboards and the whole family hunts it by candlelight, because there is a war on, and the peddler comes when he comes. Your thimble, keep your eye on this one too, is brass. Birmingham brass, bought off a peddler's tray the summer you married, dented along one side where you caught it in the barn door latch. It sits on your right middle finger like a second knuckle. Your thread is your own linen thread, run across the lump of beeswax that lives in your work basket. Third object, remember it, waxed so it will not fray and knot, and the little tug of thread across wax is a sound your daughters will hear in their sleep for the rest of their lives. And then you sew. You, Mercy, Betty on the plain long seams, Bernice when she comes, backstitch on every seam that takes strain, needle down, needle back, each stitch lapping the last so the thread lies like a fine rope. 10 stitches to the inch, 11 if Mercy is watching, felling the seams flat so no raw edge ever touches skin, because a raw edge frays, and 16 months do not fray on your watch. Narrow hems creased with a thumbnail, tiny drawn stitches gathering the sleeve into the cuff, 30 gathers eased even as teeth. Buttonholes worked in thread so dense they will outlive the shirt around them. There is no music but the fire, the small wheel, because Prue spins while the rest of you sew, and the quiet percussion of the work itself. The squeak of thread drawn through tight weave, the click of the brass thimble driving the needle, the snip, the wax, again. Someone in the next century will finally put a watch on this work. A magazine will time a plain man's shirt, sewn by an expert needlewoman, every stitch by hand. The figure they will print is 14 hours and 26 minutes. Hold that number. Say it once to yourself in the dark, because tonight is going to hand it back to you in about 70 years, and the moment it does, the whole world tips over. 14 hours, 26 minutes. And that is the sewing only. That is after the 16 months. A historian sitting down with the reconstruction would tell you the shirt under your needle holds somewhere north of 20,000 hand stitches. Nobody in this kitchen knows that figure. Everybody in this kitchen knows it. In the shoulders, in the eyes, in the lamp oil. Tuesday it rains and the sewing is good. Wednesday a sheep gets into the kale and the sewing is bad. Thursday your sister comes with her own work basket, and the kitchen is 4 women and 2 girls sewing in a ring, and this is the part I refuse to let the history books flatten into pure misery. It is work, endless work, but it is also the newspaper, the parliament, and the theatre of these women's lives. Who is courting? Who is feuding? Is what the peddler swears the ladies in Hertford are wearing this year. Betty asks why the army needs shirts from us, and Mercy, without looking up from a buttonhole she can barely see, says, because an army is just farm boys, child, and every uniform on this continent came off a table like this one. Somebody sewed every soldier at every battle since the beginning of soldiers. Wars are fought in shirts. Friday evening, Elias's shirt is done, and the 2 Levy shirts are done, and Mercy inspects all 3 by firelight, seam by seam, the linen sliding over her knuckles. She finds one wandering line of hemming, Betty's, and lets it stand, which is her way of announcing that the child has crossed some border into competence. Then she folds the Levy shirts and lays her dry old hand flat on them, the way you would rest a hand on a child's head. Cloth is time, she says. That's all it is. Time you can fold up and keep, and give to somebody. Some soldier is going to stand in the snow this winter wearing 2 weeks of this family's life, and he won't know it, and it will warm him all the same. You remember that, both of you girls. When you wear a shirt, you are wearing hours out of some woman's life. Wear it out. Wear it all the way out. That is the only respect there is. Saturday you carry the shirts to the meeting house, where the committee man writes your name in the ledger. Those ledgers are real. They survive by the 100. And Sunday. Elias wears the Sunday shirt he is not allowed to sweat in. And Monday, the wheels start again. Because there is no week in this life when the wheels do not start again. Stand in the doorway of that kitchen one more moment before we leave it. Fix the inventory in your mind. The 2 wheels, the hetchel on its nail, the beeswax in the basket, the brass thimble on the sill, the press upstairs breathing lavender over 16 months of folded time. Every object on that list is about to begin a journey, and so is every skill in that room. Because this world, this whole, complete, self-spun world that believes itself eternal, has about 70 years to live. And the first blow lands not on a farm, but in a city, in a machine shop, in the hands of men who could not sew at all. Before we get to the machine, though, honesty requires a quick word about the wheels, because the wheels fall silent first, and they fall silent a full generation before the needles do, starting in 1790, when a young English immigrant named Samuel Slater built America's first successful water-powered spinning mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and accelerating hard through the 1820s and 1830s as the great brick mills rose at Lowell and Waltham and along every falling river in New England. Factory-spun thread and factory-woven cloth got cheap. Not luxury cheap. Farm wife cheap. Calico that would have cost a fortune in Hannah's war years could be had by the 1830s for pennies a yard at any country store. And a woman is not sentimental about 400 hours at a wheel when the alternative costs less than her butter money. By the 1840s, across most of the settled country, the great wheel had already made the journey I promised you it would make, up the stairs, into the attic, under a sheet. Betty's daughters would keep one out of piety. Betty's granddaughters would sell them to antique dealers. But, and this is the hinge of tonight, so lean on it, the sewing stayed. Every yard of that cheap mill calico still had to be turned into clothing by hand, one stitch at a time, exactly as in 1780, exactly as in 1580, exactly as under the pharaohs. The mills had industrialized thread and cloth and left the needle untouched, which means the 1840s, American woman occupies the strangest position in the whole history of clothes. Cloth is finally cheap. Patterns of fashion pour out of new ladies' magazines. Her family expects more garments than ever, and every single seam of every single one still moves at the speed of her own right hand. 14 hours and 26 minutes a shirt. The bottleneck of the entire clothed world now runs directly through her work basket. Something has to break. People have been trying to break it for decades, and the story of the trying is short and violent. In 1830, a French tailor named Barthélemy Timonier patented a chain-stitch machine and set up 80 of them to sew French army uniforms. And in 1831 a crowd of Parisian tailors, terrified for their livelihoods, stormed the workshop and smashed the machines. That's documented, mob and all. Timonier died poor. In the 1830s, an American inventor named Walter Hunt, the man who later gave the world the safety pin, built a workable sewing machine and then declined to pursue the patent. The story told ever after, and I'll flag it as story, is that he feared throwing seamstresses out of bread. And then in 1846, a Massachusetts machinist named Elias Howe, sit with that first name for a second, because you have heard it once tonight already, on a farm, patented the combination that actually worked. A needle with the eye at the point, a shuttle carrying a second thread beneath the cloth, 2 threads lock in the middle of the weave, the lock stitch. Howe's patent is dated September 10th, 1846. Write that one in the margin, but don't hold it too tight because a patent is not a revolution. Howe couldn't sell the thing. It was expensive, it was cranky, and it sewed only short seams before the cloth had to be reset. The revolution has a different date and a different man, and the man was, by nearly every account including his own, a scoundrel. Isaac Merritt, singer, actor, promoter, machinist, father of somewhere north of 20 children by a collection of women he did not always trouble to marry sequentially. In 1851 in Boston, Singer was shown a bulky sewing machine under repair and, in about 11 days, rebuilt the idea. Needle moving straight up and down, cloth held flat on a table under a presser foot, fed forward automatically, driven, this detail is everything, by a foot treadle, leaving both of the operator's hands free to steer the cloth. A machine a person could actually sit at all day and sew a seam of any length. Singer patented it in August 1851. Howe promptly and correctly sued, because Singer's machine used Howe's lock stitch, and after years of litigation so tangled it threatened to strangle the industry in its crib, the major patent holders did something almost unheard of in 1856. They pooled the patents, cross-licensed, and got on with it. Howe got a royalty on virtually every machine sold in America and died rich without ever manufacturing successfully himself. Singer got the company with his name on it, and American women got the single most important domestic machine of the 19th century. Now come stand in a parlour and watch it land. It is a spring afternoon in 1856 in Utica, New York, and your name, for this chapter, is Sarah. You are 26, married 4 years to a railroad clerk named George, one baby asleep upstairs and another coming in the fall, and you are, by the standards of every grandmother in your line, rich beyond dreams, a rented house with a parlour, a cook stove, store-bought cloth in the press. And you are also drowning in the one specific way your grandmothers would recognise instantly. The mending basket. It has a lid, and the lid has not closed in a year. Shirts for George, shifts and frocks, the baby's things, sheets to turn, the coming baby's whole wardrobe waiting to exist. You sew, every woman you've ever met sews, an hour before breakfast, 2 hours in the afternoon, every evening beside the lamp until your eyes give out. Your right forefinger has a permanent callus with 100 tiny needle scars in it, exactly like your mother's, exactly like Hannah's. The work is infinite. The work has always been infinite. It has simply never occurred to you that it could be otherwise, which is why you're standing this afternoon in front of the plate glass window of a Singer sales office on Genesee Street, in a small crowd watching a young woman sew in public. That was Singer's genius, not the machine, the theatre. The company hired attractive, respectable young women, sat them at machines in shop windows and rented halls and county fairs, and let them do nothing but sew, hour after hour in full view of the street. Because every woman walking past could read the sight instantly, in a language men couldn't quite hear. The demonstrator feeds a shirt seam under the needle, treadles smoothly with both feet like a church organist, and the machine makes its sound. You've never heard the sound before. Nobody's grandmother ever heard the sound. This rapid, soft, mechanical purr. Tick, 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 tick. 40 years before anyone owns a telephone. And the seam comes out the other side finished. A seam that is an hour of your evening, in 90 seconds, done and strong and straight. You watch that needle blur for a solid 10 minutes without saying a word. The woman beside you, a stranger, older, says quietly, "I've been hemming sheets since I was 5 years old." Neither of you laughs. It is not a joke. It is a whole life standing on the pavement watching the thing that ends it. Inside, the agent does his arithmetic on a slate, and I promised you the real numbers, so here they are. The machine costs $125. Family income for a working man that year runs perhaps $500 a year. George earns a little more, but not much. A sewing machine costs a quarter of a year of your family's entire life. It is, price-wise, roughly what a decent horse costs. Nobody buys the horse either, not outright. And this is where the Singer Company changes America twice in one decade. Because in 1856, Singer's business partner, a cautious, brilliant lawyer named Edward Clark, the anti-Singer in every personal respect, invents a thing so ordinary to you that you will forget it had to be invented. The installment plan. $5 down, $3 to $5 a month. The first widely successful hire purchase scheme in American retail, invented specifically because the sewing machine was a $100 tool whose natural buyers controlled only pin money. Clark added trade-in allowances too. $50 credit for your old machine of any make, mostly so Singer could smash the competitors' machines in the back room. That's documented, the smashing included. George says what husbands across the entire Union say that decade. In a chorus, historians can actually quote from letters and from the era's joke columns. It's a great deal of money for a gadget. Your mother managed. What if it breaks? And you say, because the agent has coached the demonstrator to say it, and the demonstrator has let you say it to yourself, that at $5 down, the machine costs less each month than the shirt maker charges for 2 shirts, and you will never pay the shirt maker again. Watch this moment closely, because there will be an echo of it in nearly every chapter to come. The arithmetic of a woman's hours, done out loud, in dollars, possibly for the first time in her family's entire history. The hours were always real. They were simply never priced. The machine prices them. The machine arrives in a pine crate on a Tuesday. It smells of machine oil and black Japan lacquer and new planed wood, and it is beautiful. They made them beautiful on purpose. Gilded scrollwork on black enamel, a sphinx stenciled on the arm, because Clark understood it would live in the parlour like a piano and be shown off like one. You learn the triddle rhythm in a day, heel toe, the flywheel humming. Learn to thread the shuttle, break 11 needles the first month, and then, somewhere in the second month, it happens. You sit down after breakfast with 6 of George's shirts cut out, and by supper they are sewn. 6 shirts. One day. 80-odd hours of your grandmother's life between breakfast and supper, with your hands resting lightly on the cloth like a pilot's on a wheel. Godey's Lady's book, the great women's magazine of the age, is at this very moment calling the sewing machine the queen of inventions, in print, in those words. And it is Godey's and its rivals that publish the timing table I told you to hold in your mind since 1780. Here it comes, 70 years on schedule. A man's shirt by hand, 14 hours 26 minutes. By machine, 1 hour 16 minutes. A frock coat, 16 hours and change by hand under 3 by machine. Now that table was compiled to sell machines, and I promised to tell you which numbers are advertisements. That one is an advertisement, but historians have set it against diaries and account books, and the shape of it holds. Call it a tenfold change, and you're being conservative. There has been nothing like it in the history of the needle. There has been nothing like it, arguably, in the history of housework. So, and here is where tonight's mystery earns its keep, surely this is the answer. Surely the question, when did American women stop sewing their own clothes, is answered right here, 1856, in Sarah's parlour. Tick, tick, tick. It is not. And the reason it is not is one of my favourite strange truths in all of domestic history. The sewing machine did not end home sewing. For 50 more years it multiplied it, because the machine collapsed the cost of a seam, and fashion is nobody's fool, immediately spent the windfall. Look at photographs of the 1860s and 1870s and watch it happen in real time. Flounces, ruffles, tucks, pleats, braid, yards of trimming on a single skirt, little girls' dresses with more seams than a general's uniform. The dress of 1875 contains several times the sewing of the dress of 1845, because it can. Sarah's daughters will own machines as a matter of course, and they will sew more hours, not fewer, than Sarah ever did. The way you were promised computers would end your paperwork. The machine did not free the American woman from the needle. It chained the needle to a flywheel and told her she could now afford to want more. What the machine actually did, quietly, structurally, invisibly, was something else. And it is the reason this chapter matters to the mystery. It made sewing fast enough to be a business at scale. A machine that sews a shirt in an hour is a machine a factory can love. Keep your eye on that thought. It goes off like a charge under the next 3 chapters. And it did one more thing right there in the parlour. It took the skill of the hands, Mercy's 10 stitches to the inch, the felled seam, the eased gather, a lifetime's apprenticeship, and folded a great share of it into iron. Betty needed 30 years to sew like Mercy. Sarah's machine sews a straighter seam than either of them on its first afternoon, under the hands of anyone who can treadle. Nobody in the parlour says out loud what that means, but the brass thimble, Hannah's thimble, handed down, which is exactly the kind of thing that is handed down, now sits in Sarah's machine drawer, still used, still loved, and for the first time in 8,000 years, no longer the fastest thing in the house. The needle has become the slow way. Hold that. Everything else tonight follows from it. Now, a machine can sew a seam, but a seam is not a dress, and here we meet the problem that the flywheel could not touch. Knowing where to cut. Because in 1860, the shape of a garment, the actual pattern, the flat geometry that becomes a sleeve or a bodice when you fold it round a living person, is still knowledge, not merchandise. A fashionable woman's dress is a fitted thing, moulded to the individual body with darts and curved seams and a dozen judgment calls, and the ability to cut one is a trade secret residing in the heads of dressmakers who charge accordingly. A farm wife with a brand new singer and a magazine engraving of a Paris fashion can sew fast now, and still has no idea where the scissors should go. The magazines try. They print tiny diagrams, one size, no instructions worth the name, all the pattern pieces overlapping on a single page like a plate of dropped noodles, to be enlarged by I. Enlarged by I. Imagine building furniture from a postage stamp of the blueprint. 2 households solve this, and they solve it as businesses, and the dates are firm. The first is a New York milliner named Ellen Louise Demarest, Nell, who with her husband William launches, around 1860, a fashion empire built on selling paper, Madame Demarest's Mirror of Fashions, a magazine with actual tissue paper dress patterns pinned inside, plus a mail order and door-to-door operation distributing patterns by the 100,000 through a network of agents and shops. Demarest patterns mostly came in one size. The home sewer still graded them up or down herself. But for the first time, the geometry itself was for sale, cheap, anywhere the mail went. And one more thing about Nell Demarest, documented and worth 30 seconds of your night. In her Broadway workrooms, she employed black women alongside white women at equal terms. Decades before, that was anything but scandalous, and when customers objected, she let it be known they could take their custom elsewhere. History records that some did, and that she did not blink. The second name you already know, because it's printed on tissue envelopes to this day. Ebenezer Butterick was a tailor in Sterling, Massachusetts, and the company's own origin story. Repeated so often it has acquired a date, June 16th, 1863. Has him cutting the first graded set of patterns on the big table at home, at his wife Ellen's suggestion, because she was tired of enlarging one-size diagrams by eye. Graded is the whole invention, the same garment, offered as a nested family of sizes, cut and folded and sold in an envelope. Being a tailor, Butterick started with what he knew, men's and boys' patterns, and caught a piece of pure luck, a national craze in those very years for dressing little boys in Garibaldi suits, the jaunty military style named for the Italian hero, and every mother in the Union wanted the pattern. The Buttericks moved the operation to New York, to 192 Broadway, in 1867. In 1866 they had begun selling women's dress patterns in graded sizes, and then the numbers go vertical, and these numbers are from the trade, not from me. By 1871, the Butterick Company was selling 6 million patterns a year. 6 million! In a country of about 40 million people. By the mid-1870s, there were Butterick offices in Paris, London, Vienna. America, which had imported its fashion from Europe since before it was America, was suddenly exporting fashion's geometry back 10 cents an envelope. In 1873, the company founded a magazine to carry the patterns, the Delineator, and within a generation it would be one of the largest circulation magazines of any kind on earth. 10 cents an envelope. Some cost a quarter. Elaborate cloak and costume patterns ran 50 cents or more, but the plain arithmetic, and you know by now this channel always does the arithmetic, is this: the shape of a fashionable dress, which in 1855 was locked inside a dressmaker whose bill might run $20, is by 1871 on sale at the village dry goods store for the price of 2 spools of thread. People at the time reached for a grand word about it, and for once the grand word was simply accurate. They called it a democracy of fashion. Come see what that looked like on the ground, because it is one of the pleasantest scenes in tonight's whole story. It is a Saturday afternoon in October of 1871, in a dry goods store in Chillicothe, Ohio. Wide plank floor, coffee and calico and kerosene in the air, the particular dim gold light of a store with 2 windows and 40 bolts of cloth. And your name for this chapter is Clara. You are 19. You teach the primary school out toward Kingston, which makes you a wage-earning woman, $11 a month and found, and you have come to town with exactly $1.90 of it to spend on becoming, by Christmas, visibly fashionable. Your mother has a singer, bought on Mr. Clark's installments naturally, paid off 2 years ago, the sphinx on the arm worn halfway under her wrist. What your mother does not have, has never had, is Paris. You're about to buy Paris for 15 cents. The pattern counter is at the back and it is mobbed. And notice, the way you notice the crowd at the singer window, who it is mobbed with. The doctor's wife, the harness maker's daughter, a farm woman with the baby on her hip. 2 mill girls from the woolen factory, all of them bent over the same counter, turning the pages of the same fat catalogue of engravings. That's the democracy part, standing right there in wool, chalice and calico. These women will sew in different silks and different cottons at different prices with different amounts of trimming, but they are choosing from the same book. The senator's wife in Columbus and the hired girl who does her washing can, and increasingly do, wear the same silhouette, cut from the same 15-cent envelope. And European visitors that decade write home, in tones ranging from delight to alarm, that in America you cannot tell the mistress from the maid on the street. You cannot tell the mistress from the maid. File that sentence away. Whole chapters of tonight are hiding inside it. You choose, after 40 minutes of the catalogue, which is itself a kind of church, a polonaise, the overdress of the season, draped and looped up behind over the new bustled skirts. The clerk pulls the envelope from the 100-drawered cabinet behind him, licks his pencil, writes it in the daybook. 15 cents. Inside the envelope, whisper-thin tissue, folded to the size of your hand, opening out and out and out into ghost shapes of sleeves and fronts and backs, edges notched with a code of little cuts, because, mark this, there are no printed instructions on the pieces to speak of, just a terse paragraph on the envelope. The pattern assumes you already know how to sew. Everyone still knows how to sew. That assumption is holding up the entire industry, the way the assumption that everyone can read holds up a post office, and part of tonight's answer, the when exactly, is simply the long, slow death of that assumption. You and your mother cut the polonaise on the kitchen table on Monday evening, the tissue crackling and drifting in the lamp draft like something alive, pinned down with every pin in the house. Her shears, good Sheffield steel her one extravagance, make that same grainy whisper through wool that Mercy's made through linen 91 years back down the valley of this story. The singer purrs. And here is the heart of this chapter, the thing I want you to carry forward. What you are doing on the table is still unmistakably home sewing. Your cloth, your hours, your skill, your fit made to your own body with your mother's chalk and pins. The pattern has not taken the work out of the house. It has piped the fashion in. For 30 more years, this is the deal American women live inside. The factory spins the cloth, the machine drives the seam, the envelope supplies the shape, and the woman still supplies everything else. Her evenings, her judgment, her back. The industry has surrounded the needle on 3 sides, and on the 4th side, at that very moment, it is already breaking through. Not in women's clothing, but in men's. Because while Clara pins tissue by lamplight, her brothers have quietly stopped needing anyone at home to sew for them at all. To see how that happened, to see the first full collapse, the one that sets the clock for all the others, we have to back up a decade into the one place where America measured men by the 100,000. We have to go to the war. Ready-made clothing was not born in the war. Let's be precise, because precision is tonight's whole promise. It was born on the docks. From the early 1800s, waterfront shops in New York and Boston sold cheap, loose, pre-sewn garments to sailors. A man with 6 hours of shore leave cannot wait for a tailor, and the trade was literally called slops. The shops slop shops, which tells you exactly what everyone thought of the quality. A step above stood houses like Brooks Brothers, founded in Manhattan in 1818, selling respectable ready-made and made-to-measure both. And below the whole business, rarely said aloud in polite company but perfectly documented, Southern planters bought coarse, ready-made garments in bulk to clothe enslaved people. Some of the first true mass production of clothing in America existed to dress the people America refused to call customers. So by 1860, ready-made menswear exists, plenty of it. What it does not have is respectability or fit. A ready-made coat is what you buy when nobody at home can sew for you, and no tailor will see you. It comes in a handful of approximate sizes cut by guess, and the era's joke columns are full of men in bagging, flapping, store-bought coats. A gentleman is measured. A workingman is sewn for at home. The store coat is for the man who has neither wife nor tailor, the sailor, the miner heading west, the immigrant just off the boat. Then, in April 1861, the Union has to dress the biggest crowd of men the continent has ever assembled all at once, from nothing. Over the course of the war, roughly 2 million men pass through the Union armies, 2 million bodies that each need coat, trousers, shirts, drawers, socks, greatcoat, and need them now in wool by the 100,000. The government's own works, the Schuylkill Arsenal in Philadelphia is the famous one, and a swarm of private contractors take it on, cutting uniforms in mass lots, and in the scramble the trade coins a word for the cheap compressed wool cloth some contractors use: shoddy. The cloth fell apart in the rain. The word survived to describe everything that has fallen apart cheaply ever since. Congress investigated. Profiteers were named in the papers. I promised you I'd mark the dark seams in this story as we pass them, and there's one. The American ready-made industry learned scale on a war, and learned its first scandals the same week. But it learned something else, and this is the quiet discovery that changes your closet more than any battle changed the map. To cut uniforms in mass lots, you must decide in advance what sizes men are. So the army measured them. Contract cutters, arsenal foremen, and after the war the actuaries and statisticians who worked over the mountains of quartermaster records all sat down with the same astonishing new thing. Measurements of bodies by the 100,000, chest and waist and inseam and shoulder. More systematic data on the shape of American men than had ever existed anywhere. And the data said something wonderful. Men are predictable. Bodies cluster. A man with a 38-inch chest will, far more often than chance, carry a certain waist, a certain shoulder, a certain length of arm. Not every man, but enough men, reliably enough, that you can design a run of standard sizes and fit most of a nation straight off the shelf. The tailor's individual tape measure, it turns out, had been solving a problem that mostly didn't exist. For most male bodies most of the time, a well-designed size 38 is simply right. Armed with that, and with the sewing machines the war had also driven into every contractor's loft, the post-war menswear industry does in 20 years what nothing in tonight's story had done in 8,000. It takes the making of a whole population's clothing out of the home completely. and it makes the store-bought article respectable. The demobilized soldier had already worn standard sizes for 3 years and lived. He walked home with the habit in his bones. The clothiers built on it. Real factories now, cutting 40 thicknesses of wool at a stroke, then hundreds. Grand retail palaces in the cities with plate glass and gaslight. Price tags, fixed prices, no haggling, which was itself a novelty. And the sack suit, the loose, straight, unfitted business suit, ancestor of every suit in every office you have ever entered, conquered male fashion in the same decades, and don't call that coincidence. The sack suit is the silhouette that forgives. A fitted frock coat betrays an imperfect fit at 10 paces. A sack suit shrugs. Ready-made clothing and forgiving fashion arrive together, hand in glove. And you should remember that partnership, because tonight it happens twice, and the second time it happens to women in the 1920s, and it ends the whole story. So here is the first hard date of tonight's answer, the first pin in the board, and the evidence for it is as boring and solid as evidence gets. Census tallies of the clothing trades, credit agency reports, the trade press, the simple disappearance of home-sewn men's suits from probate inventories and family accounts. By the 1880s, the ordinary American man wore ready-made. Not just the sailor, not just the miner. The clerk, the farmer in town clothes, the minister, the groom at his own wedding. By 1890, the trade estimated the overwhelming bulk of men's clothing sold in America came off a factory cutting table, menswear, fallen by the 1880s. That is the answer's first clause, and nobody so much as paused to mourn it. Now watch what that looked like inside one house, because the strangeness of this moment is the whole point of it. It is a Saturday evening in April of 1885 in Chicago, and your name for this chapter is Frank. You're 34, a freight agent for the Burlington Road, and this afternoon, on your half-day, you walked into one of the big State Street clothiers. 3 floors, gas chandeliers, a wall of mirrors, ranks of suits hanging like a regiment on parade. And you bought a suit. A grey wool sack suit. The floor man looked at you the way a stockman looks at a steer, said 38 regular without touching you, and was right. You tried the coat before the triple mirror. A boy chalked the trouser hems. The tailor in the back, for the store keeps one tailor to do in 20 minutes what used to be the whole profession, took up the hems while you chose a necktie. $10.50 marked on a tag. Same price for you as for the next man, no haggling, and you carried it home in a paper parcel under one arm. A bespoke suit from a proper tailor would have run you $35 or $40 and 2 fittings a week apart. Your father, back on the farm in Indiana, never in his life wore a coat some woman of his own house hadn't sewn or made over. You are 1 generation off that farm, and the entire male half of the 8,000-year-old system has, for you, simply evaporated. You bought a suit the way you'd buy a hat. You will never once think about it again. And across the parlour from you, this same Saturday evening, sits the strangeness. Your wife, Ada, is sewing. She's 31. The lamp is pulled close, and she's working the long curved side-back seam of a basque, the fashionable fitted bodice of the middle 1880s, boned, darted, tight as upholstery from shoulder to hip. For herself, from a Butterick pattern, 15 cents, on cloth from Marshall Fields, on her mother's old wheel-worn Singer. She has been at it, evenings, for 2 weeks. The bodice alone has more pieces than your entire suit. It must fit her body like a glove fits a hand. which is why it cannot be bought. The very fashion of the age is a custom fit. She will pin the half-made thing on, twist before the mirror, frown, take it off, repin the dart 1/8 of an inch, and so on. 14 pieces, whalebone casings, 21 buttons, each buttonhole worked by hand because the machine can't do those yet. Call it 40 hours of skilled labour, hers, unpriced, after the housework, by lamplight. 1 parlour, 1 lamp. On one side of it, clothing is a $10 parcel from State Street chosen in an hour. On the other side, it is still 1780 with a flywheel. And if you asked either of them why, this is the part I love, neither would even understand the question. It is simply how things are. Men's clothes come from stores, women's clothes come from women. The fitted female silhouette guards the border like a customs officer. As long as fashion demands that a bodice be moulded to each individual body, no factory can dress America's women because no shelf can hold that many shapes. Ada's 40 hours are locked in place not by technology. Every machine needed already hums in her own parlour, but by a silhouette. Which means the next move in tonight's mystery belongs to fashion itself. Somewhere between Ada's lamp and her daughter's adulthood, some garment has to come along that a factory can cut in standard sizes and a respectable woman will actually wear. Not a dress. Dresses are still fortresses. Something simpler. Something forgiving. Something a working girl can buy on a Saturday with her own wages, the way Frank bought his suit. That garment exists. It is being invented, more or less, as Ada sews. It is called the shirtwaist, and it is about to put several 100,000 young women on one side or the other of a factory sewing machine, wearing what comes off it or feeding it. And it carries tonight's second date and also tonight's darkest hour. Both are coming in the same chapter, because they came in the same decade, and I won't pretend otherwise. A shirtwaist is, at bottom, a woman's blouse built like a man's shirt, buttoned front, collar, cuffs, worn tucked into a separate skirt. Say it plainly like that, and you can't hear the revolution in it, so let me translate. For most of the 19th century, a respectable American woman's daytime self was one garment. The dress, bodice, and skirt cut of a piece, fitted like Ada's basque, a fortress of construction. The waist and skirt combination broke the fortress into 2 loose confederated provinces, and everything tonight cares about follows from that break. A skirt is forgiving. Gathered or gored at the waistband, it fits a range of bodies from a handful of sizes. A waist is forgiving, bloused, soft, meant to pouch a little, its fit hidden under tucks and gathers. The sack suit's trick performed for women, which means, say it with me, because this is the whole machine of this chapter, a factory can cut it, in standard sizes, by the 100,000. And a factory did. Through the 1890s, the shirtwaist becomes the uniform of a brand new American figure, the working girl. This is the decade the word typewriter still means the young woman as often as the machine. The decade department stores, telephone exchanges, and business offices pull native-born and immigrant daughters alike into wage work by the 100,000. And every one of those young women needs to look clean, trim, and respectable 6 days a week on very little money. The waist and skirt is the answer, so completely that the magazine artists canonize it. Charles Dana Gibson's Gibson Girl, swept up hair, high collar, crisp white waist, dark skirt, is arguably the first mass media fashion icon in American history. And what she is wearing, in nearly every drawing, is ready-made or easily imitated as such. The catalogues tell you the price of admission. Sears, Roebuck at the turn of the century lists shirtwaists from around 39 cents, up through $1 or $2 for fancier goods, into silk if you're flush. A schoolteacher earning perhaps $40 a month, a shop clerk earning 6 or 7 a week, can own 4 or 5 waists, launder them in rotation, and present a fresh white front to the world every morning of her working life. The waist is cheap the way only factory goods are cheap, and it is respectable the way only fashion can make a cheap thing respectable. Both at once. That's the lock opening. So come to New York, because this chapter lives there. It is a Saturday in June of 1902, late afternoon, and your name for this stretch of the night is Rose. You are 19. You sell notions, thread, ribbon, buttons, the irony is free. Behind a counter at one of the great 6th Avenue department stores, in the stretch of Manhattan they actually call the Ladies' Mile. You board with your aunt in Brooklyn. You hand your mother's memory a portion of every pay envelope by lighting a candle, and you earn $6.50 a week, out of which come car fare, lunches, board, and the church plate. And in your pocketbook this afternoon, folded into an envelope you've labelled in pencil, is $1.98, saved over 11 weeks, a dime and a nickel at a time. Because today, on your half day, with your own wages, at the store's own summer sale, employees admitted to sale prices, one of the job's few mercies, you're going to buy a shirtwaist. White lawn, pin-tucked front, the collar high, and the sleeve still puffed at the shoulder, marked down from $3. You have sewed every garment you've ever owned, Rose. Your mother sewed the rest. This will be the first article of clothing in your entire 19 years that arrives in your life finished, cut, sewn, buttonholed, pressed, by hands you will never see. I want you to notice what you feel in the fitting mirror, because 100 diaries and memoirs of girls like you circle the same 2 feelings, and they pull opposite directions. The first is plain delight. The waist is crisp. The tucks are perfectly even, machine even 40 parallel lines of stitching down the front, a precision your own tired evening hands never quite hit. In the mirror you look like the magazine drawings. You look like money on a notions clerk's wages. When the saleswoman wraps it in tissue like something precious, like Butterick's ghost paper come back dressed as luxury. Something in your chest lifts that your grandmother would not have had a word for. The second feeling is smaller, quieter, and it arrives that evening at your aunt's when you show her the waist. Your aunt is of Mercy's persuasion. She turns it inside out. Women of her generation always turn a garment inside out first, the way a farrier looks at hooves. And she inspects the seams, and she sniffs, and she finds them. Fine. Perfectly fine. And you watch her face do a complicated thing, because if the seams had been shoddy, the world would still make sense, and they are not shoddy, and so a lifetime's knowledge has just been quietly informed that it is no longer necessary. She hands it back and says only, "Mind you iron it damp, that's all." 8,000 years, retiring from a Brooklyn kitchen in 4 words about ironing. Multiply Rose by a few 100,000 a year, and there is tonight's second pin in the board. The shirtwaist is the first mass-market, factory-made, fashionable outer garment that ordinary American women buy as a matter of course. Through the 1890s and 1900s, the separates take the daytime. Waists by the drawful, ready-made skirts increasingly beside them, ready-made coats and capes. Cloaks had gone factory even earlier. Petticoats, corsets, stockings, all store goods now. Say the clause for the record. Women's separates. fallen by about 1910. The dress itself still holds out. The fitted dress, the wedding dress, the best dress, still home sewn or dressmaker made, and that matters, it's the next chapter. But the working day of the American woman is, by the first decade of the new century, dressed by factories. The census takers can see it happening from above. Dressmakers and seamstresses, one of the largest female occupations in America in 1900, begin their long absolute decline right about there, while the number of women operating machines inside clothing factories climbs and climbs. Which brings us to the question you may already be asking, and should be, who is sewing all of this? Because the hours did not disappear. That's the iron law running under this entire night, so let me say it straight. The hours never disappear. 14 hours a shirt became 1 hour and change at a machine, but somebody still sits at the machine. When sewing left the parlour, it did not dissolve into steam. It moved. It moved into the lofts of Lower Manhattan, into a garment district that by 1910 is producing the better part of the nation's ready-made clothing for women, and it landed on the shoulders of the newest Americans there were. Jewish girls from the Russian Pale, Italian girls from the Mezzogiorno, some of them 14 years old, many of them carrying in their hands. This is the part that should stop your breath a little. Exactly the inherited skill this whole story has been following. Mercy's skill. The needle knowledge of 8,000 years, arriving in steerage and put to work at a power machine, in rows of 20, at piece rates, from 7:30 in the morning until dark and later in the rush season, in lofts 8 and 9 floors above the street. The Gibson girl's crisp white front and the sweatshop are the same fact, viewed from opposite sides of the cloth. Rose's $1.98 was possible, because a girl her own age, 3 miles north in a Washington Place loft, was paid pennies per waist. I told you at the start I would tell you the price of each miracle as we passed it. This one has 2 prices. Here is where they start coming due. In November of 1909, this is documented to the day. The young women of New York's shirtwaist shops did something wage-earning women in America had never done at such a scale. They rose. At a mass meeting at Cooper Union on November the 22nd, after hours of careful speeches by careful men, a slight young shirtwaist worker named Clara Lemlich, 23 years old, already beaten by hired thugs on a picket line that year, and she is real, every detail documented, stood up from the floor, demanded the platform and called in Yiddish for a general strike. The hall came up off its benches. Within days, somewhere between 20 and 30,000 shirtwaist makers were out, in winter, and the papers named it the uprising of the 20,000. Mink-coated society women paid picket bail, police broke heads, magistrates sent strikers to the workhouse. Through that winter, the strikers won better hours and wages in hundreds of shops. Real gains won in the cold. But at some of the largest companies the owners held out and the strikers went back with little. And one of the shops that beat the strike, one of the biggest and most famous makers of the garment this whole chapter wears, was the Triangle Waist Company, on the 8th, 9th and 10th floors of the Ash Building, at the corner of Green Street and Washington Place, 1 block east of Washington Square. 16 months later, that address becomes the reason entire American libraries of labor law exist. I'm going to tell this part the way this channel tells such things, from the edge of the crowd, at a witness's distance, with the dates exact and the voice low, because it deserves the truth, and you deserve to sleep, and the truth, told quietly, is heavy enough without decoration. It is Saturday, March 25th, 1911, a few minutes before 5 in the afternoon, closing time, the first really spring-like Saturday of the year. Washington Square is full of strollers. Let Rose be among them. She's 28 now, walking with a friend in the pale gold light. And this is the last thing tonight I will ask her borrowed eyes to see. On the top 3 floors of the 10-story ash building, about 500 employees of the Triangle Waste Company, most of them young women, most of them Jewish and Italian immigrants, some as young as 14, are reaching for their coats and their pay envelopes. On the 8th floor, in a bin of cotton scraps under a cutting table, 2 months of cuttings, hundreds of pounds of the most flammable ordinary substance in industrial America, something catches. A cigarette, most likely. No one ever proved it. Cotton waste does not burn like wood. It burns like paper dipped in air. From the square, the first sign is smoke, and then the crowd's sound changes, and people begin to run toward Washington Place. Among them a woman named Frances Perkins, 30 years old, a social worker having tea at a friend's house on the north side of the square, who will stand on the pavement and watch what happens next, and whose name I ask you to keep, because she is real. And where she carries this hour is the reason it belongs in tonight's story at all. Inside, in the 10 minutes that follow, everything that the strike of 1909 had tried to say out loud is said instead by the building. The 8th floor, where the fire starts, is warned and mostly gets out. The 10th floor, the owner's floor, is warned by telephone and mostly gets out, many over the roof, where students from the university next door lay ladders across the gap. The 9th floor, 250 machine operators, rows of machines the length of the loft, work baskets of tissue and lawn at every station. The 9th floor gets no warning but the fire itself. And the 9th floor's ways out are these: a Green Street stairway soon impassable, 2 freight elevators whose operators, Joseph Zito and Gaspar Mortiallo, their real names, remember the living too, run their cars up into the smoke again and again, carrying down far past capacity, until the heat buckles the rails and the cars can no longer rise. A flimsy iron fire escape, never meant for such a building or such a crowd, which tears away from the wall under the weight of the escaping and drops those on it to the yard below, and a door to the Washington Place stairs which, sworn to by survivor after survivor at trial, is locked. Locked because the owner's policy was to funnel departing workers past a single exit for bag inspection, against the theft of a shirtwaist. The fire department's ladders, the tallest in New York City, reach the 6th floor. The nets tear. 146 people die on the 25th of March, 1911, in the loft, in the shafts, in the yard, and on the pavement of Washington Place, in view of the crowd, in view of Frances Perkins, in the space of about 18 minutes. 129 of them are women and girls. The youngest are 14. Rose does not get nearer than the far corner of the square, held back with thousands of others, and I will not carry you nearer either. What she sees from there, what the whole city sees, is enough. The finest shopping crowd in America, in its ready-made spring clothes, standing stock still in the golden hour, understanding, some of them for the first time, all of them past any future unknowing, what the price tag on a 39-cent waist had been leaving out. That's the sight I asked you to hold since the store mirror in 1902, and it is the last hard sight of tonight. The rest of this story is what a country does the morning after. Here is what it did, and every item is checkable. The city buried its dead. On April 5th, in cold rain, a funeral procession for the unidentified drew 100,000 marchers and several 100,000 more along the route. In silence, the papers said, broken mostly by the sound of feet. The owners of the Triangle Waste Company, Isaac Harris and Max Blank, were tried for manslaughter that December over the locked door and acquitted. The jury could not be certain past reasonable doubt that the owners knew that door was locked at that hour. And civil suits years later settled for $75 per life. Write that number down next to all tonight's other numbers and let them look at each other. And then the other verdict, the slower one. New York State impaneled a factory investigating commission led by two machine politicians named Al Smith and Robert F. Wagner, with Francis Perkins as an investigator. The commission crawled through hundreds of factories, put child workers and burned stairwells into the official record, and in the space of a few years, New York passed the most sweeping factory safety and labor laws in American history to that point. Mandatory sprinklers, unlocked outward opening doors, fire drills, limits on hours for women and children. Other states copied them. Smith and Wagner carried the work into national politics. Wagner's name ends up on the labor law that legalized the American Union, and Frances Perkins, the woman on the pavement, becomes, in 1933, the first female cabinet member in United States history, Secretary of Labor for all 12 years of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, architect of Social Security, and she says it herself in so many words, ever after. The New Deal began on March 25th, 1911. That is where the ready-made shirtwaist sits in American memory, and why I could not honestly give you tonight's second date without it. The waist democratized fashion twice over, once at the counter, once at terrible cost in the law. Breathe now. Truly, take one slow breath and let your shoulders come down, because we are through the hardest hour of the night, and the story itself is about to exhale. The fire's laws slowly made the loft safer. The union the strikers built grew into one of the great institutions of American labor, and the garment industry itself, chastened, regulated, and enormous, rolled on into a decade that would finish tonight's mystery almost gently, with a change so simple, so absurdly simple, that it can be stated in one sentence and then enjoyed at leisure. Fashion stopped requiring clothes to fit. Come stand at a high window and watch. It is a warm October afternoon in 1925, and your name for this chapter is Helen. You're 24, a buyer's assistant for a department store out of Cleveland, and you're standing at the 12th floor window of a showroom on 7th Avenue in New York, waiting while your buyer argues prices in the next room. Below you and around you, for blocks in every direction, spreads the new garment district. The lofts have marched uptown since the fire, and from this height it lies open like a diagram of everything tonight has told you. Racks of dresses crossing the streets below on push-boys' carts, bolts of cloth swinging from hoists, the stitched-together roar of 10,000 power machines coming up through the glass as a single low hum, freight trains of it, whole city blocks sewing. Somewhere down there is the loft where the fire was. There is a plaque now. Somewhere down there are 100,000 machine operators working under sprinklers behind doors the law requires to open outward. And moving between the racks and ramps, small as stitches from up here, the buyers from Cleveland and Atlanta and Denver and Spokane, carrying order books that will dress the entire female population of the United States. You are one thread of it, barely a thread, but you are in it. The first generation of women in the history of your line to stand above the work and watch it done by a city instead of doing it by a lamp. And what the city is sowing this season is the reason the last wall falls. Remember what held the wall up. In 1885, in Ada's parlour, the dress could not be factory made because the dress was a fitted fortress. Dozens of pieces sculpted to one particular torso. In 1902, the shirtwaist got through because it was forgiving. Now look at what is hanging on the sample racks behind you in 1925. The fashionable dress has become a tube, straight from shoulder to dropped hip, no defined waist, no darts to speak of, no boning, no moulding. The flapper silhouette, the chemise dress. Call it what the magazines call it, season to season. But look at it as a cutter looks at it, the way tonight has taught you to look. A fashionable 1925 frock is 2 or 3 main pattern pieces. It hangs from the shoulders and skims the body. Skims, not grips. Which means the fit problem that guarded women's dressmaking for a century, the problem that kept a nation of Adas sewing 40-hour bodices at midnight, has not been solved. It has been repealed. A dress that touches you almost nowhere cannot fit you badly. One size fits many. A run of 6 sizes fits nearly everyone near enough for the mirror. Exactly as the sack suit did for men in the 1880s, the tube does for women in the 1920s. Forgiving fashion arrives, and the factory walks straight through the gap. I told you the partnership would happen twice. This is the second time, and it is the decisive one, and this time the factory does not arrive alone. It arrives with the whole roaring apparatus of the American 1920s selling machine, and I want you to feel the pincer closing, item by item. The department store, palace size now, with fitting rooms and seasonal fashion floors, and new, spreading fast in exactly these years. The charge account. The metal charge plate in a lady's handbag. Buy now, pay monthly. Edward Clark's $5 down grown-up. And move to the dress floor to compete against the very sewing machines it was invented to sell. The mail order catalogue. Sears and Montgomery Ward, laying full-colour dress pages into every rural mailbox in America. Silk and wool frocks for a few dollars, cotton house dresses for $1, sizes by bust measure, delivered anywhere a train stops. The movies, and don't skip past the movies, because the historians don't. Every week, tens of millions of Americans, more women than men, sit in the dark watching enormous glowing women wear clothes, and what they wear in January is knocked off on 7th Avenue by spring at every price from silk down to rayon. Rayon? Artificial silk, the first of the laboratory fibres, cheap and shiny and everywhere by the middle 20s, so that the stenographer's frock can shimmer at a price the stenographer can pay. Paris still decrees, but a Patou line shown in October is hanging, translated and simplified, on a Cleveland rack by Easter. And, the old miracle again compounding, the office girl and the banker's wife are choosing from the same racks, distinguishable at arm's length mainly by the cloth. Even the sizes themselves tell you the system is still half improvised, and this detail is documented and I think quietly hilarious. Through this whole era, Mrs. Ready-Made sizes are named by age. A size 16 means, notionally, sized for a 16-year-old. Grown women by 14s and 18s, and nobody anywhere is actually 14 or 18. The numbers have already come unmoored from any measured body and floated off into the pure abstraction where dress sizes have lived happily ever since. Women's sizes go by bust measure. Stout, slender, and half sizes multiply catalogue pages, and everyone privately understands that you order 2, keep 1, and send the other back. It is chaos. It is commerce. It works, because the tube forgives. So watch Helen spend her own money because her Saturday is tonight's 3rd pin going into the board. Back home in Cleveland on an October Saturday in 1925 on her own half-day, Helen walks the dress floor of her own store as a customer and buys, for $6.95, marked on the tag, employee discount taken at the register, a navy rayon crepe frock, size 16, she's 24, dropped waist, pleated below the hip, a white collar that launders separately. It takes her 40 minutes, most of which is enjoyment. Enjoyment. Mark that. Within one generation, acquiring a dress has flipped from being among the heaviest labours of a woman's calendar to being among its reliable pleasures. The trying on, the mirrors, the tissue in the box, the carrying of the box, whose string handle against 2 fingers is one of the sweet small physical sensations of the American 20th century. Her grandmother cut fortresses by lamplight. Helen buys a tube on Saturday and wears it dancing the same night. And here the last of Hannah's inventory surrenders quietly. So let's stand at attention while it does. The hope chest, the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, where a girl's hand-sewn trousseau accumulated for years against her marriage, shifts and linens stitched through her teens. The single largest sewing project of most American women's lives for 2 centuries. Helen has one, inherited, and when she marries in 1927, it will hold store-bought lingerie and store tissue, catalogue linens, and folded at the very bottom in a pillowcase, her grandmother's wedding shifts, kept not for use, but for memory. The chest that was a workload has become a reliquary. Nobody legislated that. It happened one Saturday purchase at a time in 10,000 towns in about 1 decade, because that is the finding, and the numbers are as solid as social numbers get. Market studies, catalogue volumes, the census-watching dressmakers vanish as an occupation, household budget surveys that itemize what working families actually bought. By the end of the 1920s, the ordinary American woman in cities and towns bought her dresses ready-made as the normal case, and sewed one, if she sewed one, by choice, for best, or for thrift. Dresses, fallen in the 1920s. 3rd clause of tonight's answer. Menswear by the 1880s. Women's separates by about 1910. Dresses in the 1920s. The fortress that held out for 40 years after Frank's $10 sack suit went down in roughly 8 seasons. And it went down not to a better machine but to a shorter, straighter frock. When people tell you fashion is trivial, you may quietly recall that a hemline did what the entire Industrial Revolution alone could not. But, and you knew a but was coming, because you have learned tonight how this channel treats a tidy story. Walk out of the Cleveland store with Helen's dress box and keep walking, out past the streetcar suburbs, out along the section roads, and the picture changes with every mile. In the farm kitchens of Ohio and Kansas and Georgia, on the wrong side of the electric line, and in 1925 most American farms are still beyond it, the singer is not a parlour antique. It is the treadle machine by the window, and it is still, quietly, dressing a very large minority of the country. Farm women, poor women, most children in most places, the tall and the stout whom the size charts insult, and every household where $6.95 is not a half-day's whim, but 2 days of a man's wages. The store dress has conquered the town. It has not conquered the arithmetic of the countryside, and the countryside still knows, in its hands, everything Mercy knew, Hold that thought exactly where it is. Because in October 1929, the arithmetic of the whole country changes overnight, and for one strange decade, the story we have been telling all night, needle surrendering to price tag, skill retiring drawer by drawer, runs, believe it or not, in reverse. The wheels don't come back, but the needles do, and they come back in the most American costume imaginable, printed with flowers and smelling faintly of chicken feed. If you have spent other nights on this channel down among the Depression years, you know the household commandment of that decade by heart, because the people who lived it repeated it to their grandchildren until it became furniture. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Between 1929 and 1933, the country's income roughly halves. A quarter of the workforce has no work at all, and cash money clothing is one of the first things a frightened family budget throws overboard. The store dress is still in the store window. The window is still on Main Street. But the dollar has left town, and so, all over America, the needle comes down out of the attic with a speed that proves something this whole night has been quietly arguing. The skill was never gone. It was one generation deep at most. The mother still knew, the daughters had at least watched, and necessity is history's fastest sewing teacher. Come stand in the right place to see it, and let it be somewhere honest. The feed store in a county seat town in central Kansas on a Saturday morning in March of 1933, the very month for your bearings that the banks close and the new president tells the country the only thing it has to fear is fear itself. The store smells of bran, twine, kerosene, and mice with ambitions, and your name for this chapter is Dorothy. You're 38, a wheat farmer's wife with 3 children, and you are here with your husband Carl to buy laying mash for the hens, but you're the one who chooses it, and Carl would no more interfere than he would name the hens, because ranged along the wall, stacked chest high, the 100-pound sacks of feed and flour are printed, patterned floral, rose sprigs on cream, blue window pane check, a yellow paisley that would not look out of place on a bolt at Marshall Fields, and every farm woman in this store is reading that wall the way Helen read the racks on 7th Avenue. Here's the documented history under that wall, and it is one of my favourite pieces of pure American commerce in this whole story. Cotton bags had replaced barrels for shipping flour and feed decades back, and thrifty women had always bleached the plain ones into dish towels and drawers. The mills knew it, and by the mid-1920s at least one flour brand was frankly selling its gingham bag as a dress length, with the flour almost incidental. But in the 30s, the bag manufacturers see the whole female countryside sewing for survival and go after that market with their eyes open. They hire pattern designers, issue new prints seasonally like a fashion house, print the brand label in water-soluble ink or on a paper band so it washes out or peels away, because they understand with real delicacy that a woman will wear thrift but not an advertisement, and they distribute little booklets of dress patterns designed to the sack. A 100-pound sack opens out to roughly a yard of usable cotton, 37 by 42 inches or thereabouts. Call it 3 to 4 sacks to a woman's dress, 1 for a child's, and suddenly the feed order is a fabric order. Dorothy needs 3 more of the rose sprig to finish, and so Carl will be sent back Tuesday with a snipped swatch pinned to his overalls and the sternest instructions of his month. And the feed man, who has watched this scene daily for years, will climb the stack himself to dig for the matching lot, because a store that won't match prints loses its trade to the store that will. farm papers run sack dress sewing contests. The trade, by the peak years, will estimate the number of American women and children wearing feed sack garments in the millions. That figure is the industry's own, so salt it accordingly. But the museum collections, the surviving dresses, the contest photographs, and about 10,000 oral histories agree on the substance. For a decade and change, a meaningful share of rural America got dressed out of the barn shipping department and got dressed rather well. Watch Dorothy's kitchen that week, because tonight owes her the same close light it gave Hannah. The treadle singer under the west window, her mother's machine, freighted out from Ohio, needle position worn silver on the deck. The pattern is cut from a simplicity envelope, 10 cents even now, because the pattern companies, meeting the moment, sell cheap and sell hard all decade. Betty Fashion, her eldest girl pins tissue, the middle one picks stitches out of an old seam for the thread. Thread is money. The boy turns the flywheel to start her off when the belt slips. The rose sprig cotton smells of bran and March air off the line, and it sews up crisp. And Thursday night Dorothy stands her daughter on a kitchen chair to check the hem drop by lamplight. Rural electrification is still years out on this section road, with her mouth full of pins, revolving the child by the shoulder a quarter turn at a time. And this scene, this exact scene, chair and pins and turning child, is running that same night in a few million kitchens between the mountains, and it is 1780 again. And it is not. Because on the chair being hemmed is a fashionable dress. Puffed sleeve, sweetheart neck, copied out of the pattern book which copied it off a picture show. For the cost of the feed the hens ate anyway, plus 1 dime and 3 evenings. Mercy's granddaughter's granddaughters, it turns out, kept every stitch of the old competence and married it to every trick of the new machine age. The hours came back. The women had them ready. The hours never disappear, remember. They wait. 2 more depression scenes quickly because they finish the decade's honest picture. First, the skill went back to being currency. In every town, some woman with a better machine and a surer hand sewed for pay again. Made-overs especially. A man's suit turned into a boy's. A coat turned, collar to hem to hide the shine of wear. Sears even ran a remodelling service by mail. The census, which had watched dressmakers dwindle for 30 years, watches the dwindling pause. Second, the government itself, of all people, became the country's biggest employer of seamstresses. The WPA's sewing rooms, from the mid-30s, put hundreds of thousands of women on the payroll at machines, sewing garments, and bedding by the hundreds of millions of pieces for relief distribution. The same stroke twice, if you're keeping the ledger from the beginning of tonight. Shirts for the levy, 1 more time, except now the meeting house ledger is a federal one and the women are paid. Frances Perkins is Secretary of Labour while it happens. History does occasionally rhyme in your favour. So the 30s prove the deep thing, and then the 40s end the story. And I want to be precise about the order, because this is the part everyone half remembers wrong. The Depression did not uninvent the store dress. Catalogue and store clothing kept selling all decade, and town women kept buying it. What the Depression proved is that home sewing's real name had become thrift. Not necessity in the old total sense, Hannah's sense, where the alternative to sewing was nakedness, but the stretched dollar's last best trick. And a trick tied to the dollar lives and dies by the dollar. Through the war years, cloth rationed by Washington's Order L-85, silk gone to parachutes, make do and mend a patriotic duty. The needle stays busy one final wartime decade, shirts for the levy in its third costume. And then, after 1945, the dollar comes roaring back. Full employment, doubled family incomes, the greatest consumer boom in the history of money. And the moment thrift stops being compulsory, the country answers tonight's question for the last time, and we can finally pin the fourth date. But before we pin it, the ready-made dress had one last piece of homework to hand in, because through all these years of conquest, it had never actually solved the oldest problem in this story. It had dodged it, with tubes and blousing and forgiveness. In the late 1930s, the United States government decided to solve it outright, with tape measures, and what it did next is so squarely in the spirit of tonight that it may be my favourite single fact of the whole episode. Think back across the whole night for a second, because the symmetry is almost too good. In the 1860s, an army measured a couple of million men, found that bodies cluster, and handed menswear the standard sizes that broke the home needle's monopoly forever. Women's clothing never got its war. Its sizes stayed folklore. Ages that weren't ages, bust measures that guessed at everything below the bust. Every manufacturer's 16 a different animal. And the whole teetering system was propped up by forgiveness of cut and the customer's patience with sending things back. So between 1939 and 1941, the United States Department of Agriculture, because home economics lived under agriculture, which tells you exactly who Washington thought clothing belonged to, funded the study the industry had never done. Two researchers, Ruth O'Brien and William Shelton, sent measuring teams out through the states, and they measured roughly 15,000 American women. Volunteers, paid a small fee, measured scientifically at some 59 points, ankle girth to sitting height to the slope of the shoulder. It was the first large-scale scientific measurement survey of American women ever conducted, and I'll flag its documented blind spot in the same breath, because that's tonight's deal. The sample was drawn overwhelmingly from white women, and its averages carried that bias forward into every size chart it touched. What the survey found, though, reshaped the racks anyway. Female bodies do not cluster the way male bodies do. One number cannot predict the rest of a woman. You need at least height and girth both. And from that finding, after the war came the whole familiar apparatus. The published body measurement tables, and in 1958 the government-backed commercial standard for women's ready-made sizing, the one that finally told every manufacturer in the country what a size 12 was supposed to mean. It held for a generation before vanity sizing began quietly melting it. But that's a different bedtime story. What matters tonight is the date and the meaning. By the 1950s, for the first time in the entire history of this problem, a woman of nearly any build could walk into a store in Wichita or Atlanta or Spokane and expect, reasonably, routinely, to find a dress that genuinely fit her off the rack for a day's wages or less. The last honest advantage of the home needle, fit, real fit, the thing Ada's 40 hours had bought, was gone. And so we arrive, right on schedule, at the last kitchen table of the night. It is a Thursday evening in April of 1958, in a ranch house in a subdivision outside Columbus, Ohio. Picture window, wall-to-wall carpet, the television murmuring to the children in the den. And your name, for this last borrowed hour, is Barbara. She's 32. Her husband sells insurance. There's a Ford and a half in the carport, and on the dining table, pinned to 2.5 yards of polished cotton the colour of raspberry sherbet, is a Vogue pattern for a full-skirted summer party dress. On the sideboard sits her machine, electric, portable, pale green, a wedding present. The treadle went to the church rummage sale years ago. And in the machine's drawer, in a cough-drop tin, among the bobbins and the seam ripper, there is a small brass thimble with a dent along one side. You know the thimble. You've known it since 1780. It has come down the whole line of this story the way such things actually do come down. Not as an heirloom with a certificate, but as a small object too loved to throw away, riding in one work basket after another for 170 years, its dent outliving every hand that knew how the dent got there. Barbara believes it belonged to a great-great-grandmother. The count of greats has gone soft, the name softer, which is, I promised you honesty, exactly how it goes. The object survives. The story wears smooth like the brass. Somewhere back down the line stands a woman whose name the family no longer quite has, holding a needle by a fire we can no longer quite see. Tonight the thimble sits in the tin while Barbara cuts, because Barbara sews with a modern steel one from the 5 and 10, but she keeps it. She will never not keep it. Now here is the question that pins the last date, and I want you to hear how strange it is after everything this night has held. Why is Barbara sewing at all? Nobody assessed her a levy. No frost is coming that pennies can't handle. The racks downtown are full of party dresses that fit, at prices her household absorbs without blinking. Her answer, and we have her answer, not from one Barbara but from thousands, because by the 1950s the pattern companies, the extension services, and the marketing men were surveying home sewers with great energy, and the surveys all sing the same tune. Her answer is, because I want to. Because Vogue's pattern is a couture line she couldn't buy in Columbus at any price. Because raspberry polished cotton at $1.19 a yard makes a $12 dress for $4 and change. And the difference is a private victory she enjoys keeping score of. Because a machine-sewn French seam done well is satisfying the way a well-struck golf ball is satisfying. Because her mother taught her, depression taught her, and the skill hums in her hands on spring evenings and asks to be used. Listen to that list. Pleasure, prestige, pocket money, craft, memory. Not one word of necessity. Somewhere between Dorothy's kitchen chair in 1933 and Barbara's dining table in 1958, with the war years as the hinge, home sewing in America crossed the line it can never cross back. It stopped being what a woman had to do and became something a woman chose to do. That is the fourth pin and the last. After the war, call it the 1950s and be done, sewing your own clothes became a hobby. A vast hobby, mind you. The home economics classrooms of the era put a needle in the hands of most of a generation of American girls, millions of them a year, sewing their gathered skirts for a grade in junior high, and the pattern companies sold patterns by the scores of millions annually to a country of sewers larger in raw head count than ever before. The needle did not die. It retired with a full pension into the leisure of the richest working class in the history of the world, but necessity was over. When Barbara's daughter reaches high school in the 60s, home ec sewing will already need to justify itself as creativity and thrift if you wish. By the time her granddaughter shrugs past it in the 80s, the class itself will be dying out of the schools, and the granddaughter's closet, and yours, is where tonight began, full and zero. So let us do at last and slowly what I promised in the title, because you have earned every date the honest way by living through them. When exactly did American women stop sewing their own clothes? Here is the whole answer, laid out like pattern pieces on a clean table. The wheels went first, and before the needles, home spinning and weaving died of the New England mills between the 1790s and the 1840s, and cloth became a thing you bought. The needle then got a motor in 1846 and 1851. Howe's lock stitch and Singer's treadle, and Edward Clark's $5 down put the motor in the parlour from 1856, and home sewing, so armed, grew mightier than ever, even as it dug its own grave, because a machine fast enough for a parlour was fast enough for a factory. The Shape of Fashion went on sale from 1860, and June of 1863, Demarest and Butterick tissue paper at 10 cents, 6 million envelopes a year by 1871. Then the Falls in order. Men first, measured by their war in the 1860s, sized by its data, dressed off the shelf as the normal case by the 1880s. Women's separates next, the shirtwaist and its skirt, forgiving enough to cut in sizes, cheap enough for a shopgirl's envelope. The working day of American women essentially store-dressed by about 1910. With the uprising of 1909 and the fire of March 25th, 1911 standing forever in the ledger as what the price tag had been leaving out. Dresses in the 1920s, when the tube repealed the fitting problem and the charge plate, the catalogue and the movies did the rest. The ordinary town woman buying, not sewing. Her dresses by the decade's end. Then the long coda of the holdouts, the farm, the poor, the hard to fit, the children's play clothes, the house dress, thrift sewing, roaring back through the feed sack 30s and the rationed 40s, proving the skill was never lost, only priced. And then the post-war boom paid the country out of thrift. The measuring project of 1939 to 1941 gave the racks honest sizes at last by 1958, and necessity ended. From the 1950s on, an American woman at her machine was there because she wanted to be. If you demand one sentence for the whole night, take this one. It took 100 years to happen, and it happened 4 times. The 1880s for the men, 1910 for the waist, the 1920s for the dress, the 1950s for the last stitch of need, and no woman who lived through any one of those dates ever quite noticed she was living through a date at all. It felt, each time, like one Saturday, one parcel, one mirror. That is how 8,000 years end, not with a bell, but with a receipt. Let the table clear itself now. The dates are pinned. The case is closed. There is nothing left tonight but the slow, pleasant business of putting the story to bed, folding it up, the way cloth gets folded, along the creases it came with. So let's walk back through and turn the lamps down one at a time and see what became of everyone, because you have kept company with these people for a long stretch of dark, and this channel does not walk out on its people. The real ones first, with real endings, since real endings are owed. Elias Howe, the machinist who put the eye in the point of the needle, collected his royalty on nearly every machine in America until his patent ran out. And when the war came, he helped raise a Connecticut regiment and served in it as a private. A millionaire private, who at least once, the story runs from his regiment's own memory, covered the payroll when the army's was late. He died in 1867 at 48, rich as a railroad and still not famous, which seems to have suited him. Isaac Singer, having scandalized New York past even New York's limits, removed himself to Europe, married a French woman he met, of course, improbably, built a vast folly of a mansion in Devon, England that he named the Wigwam, and died there in 1875, leaving an estate in the millions and a probate case involving some 24 children that entertained two continents' lawyers for years. Edward Clark, the quiet lawyer who invented $5 down, put his sewing machine fortune into Manhattan real estate and commissioned, on a block so far uptown that people mocked it as the Dakota Territory, an apartment palace called the Dakota. Yes, that Dakota. The sewing machine built it and died in 1882, just before it opened. Ebenezer Butterick died in 1903. You can walk into a fabric store this week, anywhere in America, and buy a tissue paper pattern in an envelope with his name on it, 160 years after the dining table in Sterling. Ellen Demarest, who never patented her patterns and watched sharper-elbowed firms take the field she'd planted, sold up in 1887 and died in 1898. Remembered now, when she is remembered, exactly the way she deserves. First, with the tissue, and unbending about who was welcome to sew it. Clara Lemlich, blacklisted from every shirtwaist loft in New York after the uprising, simply moved the fight. She organized housewives, rent strikes, kosher meat boycotts, and consumer leagues for half a century as Clara Lemlich Shavelson. And in her last years, in a nursing home in California, she is credibly reported to have helped the orderlies organize their union, in her 80s, from the bed. She died in 1982, having outlived the shirtwaist, the loft, and nearly the century. Joseph Zito, the elevator man who rode into the smoke until the rails buckled, was honoured by survivors for the rest of his life and never entirely forgave himself for the trips that couldn't be made. He died in 1932. Harrison Blank, the Triangle owners, acquitted and insured. The record shows their insurance payout exceeded their documented losses, went back into the shirtwaist business. In 1913, Blank was fined $20 for once again locking an exit door during working hours. I'll leave that fact where it lies, without one more word, which is what it deserves. And Frances Perkins, the woman taking tea on the north side of the square, served as Secretary of Labour for 12 years, carried the Social Security Act on her shoulders in 1935, kept a folded piece of paper's worth of that March afternoon behind everything she ever built, said so plainly whenever asked, taught at Cornell into her final years, and died in 1965, having done as much as any single person in the century to make sure the price of a cheap garment would never again be quietly billed to the people who sewed it. And the others, Hannah and Mercy, Sarah at her window, the Clara who taught school and bought Paris for 15 cents, Frank and Ada on either side of one lamp, Rose with her tissue-wrapped waist, Helen at the 12th floor glass, Dorothy with her mouth full of pins, Barbara and her raspberry cotton. You know what I owe you about them, because I promised it at the top. They were never any one woman, and so there are no graves to visit and no endings to report. They were stitched for you tonight out of 1,000 diaries and ledgers and photographs of women whose names history mostly did not trouble to keep. Whoever they each really were, and they were, by the 1,000, as real as rain. History closed gently over them, the way grass closes over a bleaching green, and what they left behind is not names. It is the clothes in the museum cases with no card beside the seams. It is the 10,000 surviving quilts pieced from shirts this story watched being sewn. It is the dent in a brass thimble in a cough-drop tin in a drawer. The objects got endings too, and they are peaceful ones, so let's have them, softly, like calling a roll of the honourably discharged. The Hetchel with its iron teeth hangs on a museum wall now, labelled behind glass, drawing no blood. The great wheel stands in historic house parlours and antique barns, and decorators pay handsomely for what Betty's granddaughters could not give away. The flax brake rots sweetly behind old barns from Maine to Carolina. The lump of beeswax, this one always makes me happy, never retired at all. Walk into any notions aisle in the country tonight and there it is, a little cake of beeswax in a plastic holder, sold for waxing thread, unchanged in its duties since before the Republic. The shears got lighter and sharper and are still in every sewing household on earth, the one tool nobody else is permitted to touch. The treadle singers, black and gold, sphinx worn to a shadow, sit in 100,000 American parlours this very night as end tables and plant stands, and inside nearly every one the mechanism still turns if you free the belt. They were built like bridges. They will outlast the houses. And the skill itself, the real inheritance, Mercy's 10 stitches to the inch, did not die either. It did what retired things do. It kept busy. It pieces quilts by the million. It sews costumes and christening gowns and prom dresses with stories attached. It fills classes and guilds and long, generous online tutorials taught, more often than you would guess, by somebody's grandmother. And in the spring of 2020, when the country abruptly needed 100 million cloth masks and the stores had none, the machines came down off the closet shelves in a week, and the fabric stores sold out of elastic, and the hours, you know the words by now, say them with me one last time, the hours never disappear, they wait. They were waiting in 1 million American houses all along, folded flat like cloth in a press, smelling faintly of lavender and machine oil, and when they were needed they shook themselves out as if 70 years were an afternoon. So that is the whole of it, and you can let it go now. You can let all of it go. It is late. Later than it was in that Connecticut kitchen when the shears went through new linen. Later than the lamp burned in Ada's parlour. The light is off in the notions aisle, and the pattern drawers are closed, and up and down the dark of 7th Avenue the machines are covered and still. Every needle in this story is at rest tonight. Yours too. Whatever you are wearing as you drift, right now, at this hour, the soft shirt, the worn cotton, the blanket with its 10,000 machine stitches lying weightless over you. Somebody made it. Hands you will never see cut it and guided it under a needle and folded it, the way hands have always done, and it came to you the long way around the world, and it is warm. Mercy asked only one thing of you, all those years down the valley. Wear it out. Wear it all the way out. You're keeping her commandment simply by lying there. That is the only respect there is, and you are paying it in your sleep. And you have everything you need to let the night take it from here. You are warm enough. You are covered enough. You are tired enough. The good tiredness, the sewing circle tiredness, the kind that comes from following a long thread all the way to its knot. You have the dates, and the dates will keep till morning. You have the shirt and the waist and the raspberry dress. You have the thimble. That is more than most centuries gave anybody. That is enough. Listen, and let the sounds of the whole night come back one at a time, each one softer than the last, the way sounds return at the very edge of sleep. The hum of the great wheel, walked by a girl going nowhere, miles and miles of nowhere, steady as surf. The whisper of shears through linen, a spade in dry sand, very slow, the small click of a brass thimble, and the squeak of waxed thread drawn through tight cloth, and the fire settling. The treadle's soft mechanical purr, tick, tick, tick. A parlour in Utica with a window open to spring. The dry rustle of tissue paper, unfolding and unfolding. ghost shapes drifting in lamplight. The murmur of a pattern counter on a Saturday, 40 women turning the pages of the same book. The string handle of a dress box against 2 fingers. The rain on a Kansas window while a hem comes round, a quarter turn at a time. Let each sound finish and fade. They are all one sound if you listen from far enough away. They always were. It is the sound of somebody making something warm for somebody else, and it has not stopped once in 8,000 years, and it is not stopping now. It is only moving away down the valley, getting fainter, the way a wheel in a far room gets fainter as you sink towards sleep. Let it come now. Let sleep take you the way the current took the retted flax, easy and slow, downstream past the weighted stones. Let the field of blue flowers close for the day. They only ever bloomed for a morning, and they never minded. Let the lamp in the parlour gutter down. Let the machines fall quiet floor by floor, the way they fall quiet at closing time, one row, then the next, then the last, until there is only the watchman's footsteps and the smell of cloth in the dark. Let the pattern tissue settle. Let the pins go back in the cushion. Let your hands, your own hands that have carried nothing heavier tonight than a blanket's edge, uncurl and rest, the way hands rest on a work basket lid when the last seam is felled, and there is truly, finally, nothing more to do before morning. Centuries will pass. The closet a few steps from your bed will change beyond recognition, and change again, in ways no one lying awake tonight can guess. The machines will grow strange. The fibres will be spun from things that have no fields. The stores themselves may fade the way the pattern counters faded, and something we have no word for yet will take their place, and somebody's granddaughter will find a receipt from this decade and squint at it the way we squinted at the meeting house ledger. But people will still fold soft things carefully because somebody they love will wear them. Still keep one small dented object in a drawer past all memory of why. Still sit down now and then on a spring evening entirely by choice and make a thing with their hands that the stores could have sold them faster, and feel that specific quiet victory that has no price tag and never did. Some things don't change. The warmth handed from one person to another, folded flat, smelling of lavender, that does not change. Hannah is asleep, and the levy is paid. Sarah is asleep, and the machine is oiled and covered. Rose is asleep in Brooklyn, and the waist hangs white in the dark, ironed damp, ready for Monday. Dorothy is asleep, and the hem is even. Barbara is asleep, and the raspberry dress is finished, and it fits. The whole long line of them, wheel to treadle to counter to rack. All of them are asleep now, and every one of them would tell you the same thing if you woke them. So don't wake them. Take it from me instead, in the voice this channel keeps for the last minute of the night. The work is done. The work is done, and the cloth is folded, and the press is full, and winter can come when it likes. You've earned this rest. You've been awake by my count since 1780. And if your mind is the kind that wants one small task to hold while it goes under, some minds do, no shame in it. It is the same instinct that kept hands busy through 8,000 winters. Then here is a better thing to count than sheep. Count the dates one last time, slowly, letting each one go as you pass it. 1780. A kitchen table scrubbed and sacred, and shears going through 16 months of linen, and you may let it go. 1846. 1851. An eye moved to the point of a needle, a treadle under 2 feet, and you may let them go. 1856. $5 down, a sphinx in gilt on black enamel, a mending basket whose lid finally closes, and let it go. June the 16th, 1863. Tissue paper folded to the size of a hand, opening out and out into ghosts of sleeves, and let it go. The 1880s. A grey sack suit in a paper parcel under a freight agent's arm. 38 regular, and let it go. 1910, or near enough. A white waist, ironed damp, hanging ready for Monday in a Brooklyn dark, and let it go. And beside it, always beside it, the 25th of March, 1911, which we do not let go. We set it down gently where the law can watch over it, which is where 146 people finally put it themselves, through Francis Perkins, who kept it for the rest of the century so that you would not have to keep it tonight. The 1920s. A tube of navy rayon, a string handle against 2 fingers, a Saturday that felt like nothing and was everything, and let it go. 1933. Rose sprigs on cream, a swatch pin to a man's overalls, a child on a chair turning a quarter turn at a time, and let it go. 1958. 15,000 tape measures finally agreeing on what a size 12 means, and raspberry cotton on a suburban table, sewn for no reason on earth except the pleasure of the hands, and let that one go last, because it is the gentlest ending any revolution in this channel's whole archive has ever had. There. The board is empty. The pins are back in the cushion. You counted them down the way the wheel used to count the evening, and there is nothing at the bottom of the count but sleep. Tomorrow there will be clothes again, and every one of them will simply be there, folded, hanging, waiting. The whole 8,000-year miracle sitting in your closet pretending to be ordinary. Tomorrow there will be buttons done up without thinking, a collar settled with one tug, a cuff that fits because a government once measured 15,000 strangers so that it would. Tomorrow the whole quiet machinery will go on dressing you the way it dresses everyone. Hands you will never see making warmth you will never have to earn. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is only the blanket's small weight, and the pillow going cool side up, and the last few lights going out down the long street of this story, one window at a time. The same as they went out in Hannah's Valley, when the levy was carried and counted. The same as they went out over Genesee Street, when the demonstrator finally rose from the window machine and stretched her shoulders and drew the shade. The same as they went out along the Ladies' Mile, floor by floor, counter by counter, the tissue settling in the dark like snow that has decided to be kind. The same as all the evenings, all the way down the line of them, everyone ending the same way. A woman looking at the day's work, finding it enough and putting out the light. Enough. That is the word this whole night has been sowing toward, so take it with you across the border. The shirt was enough, and the soldier never knew whose hours warmed him. The waist was enough, at $1.98, 11 weeks in the saving. The dress was enough, raspberry sherbet, $4 and change and a private victory. And you are enough, warm enough, safe enough, tired enough, lying still while the oldest work in the world finishes its rounds without you, as it has finally, mercifully, learned to do. So put the needle back in its bone case and count it safe. Set the thimble on the sill where the morning will find it. Fold the day like a levee shirt, seams in, lavender between, and lay your hand flat on it for a moment, the way Mercy would, and let it keep. Sleep now, the way they slept when the sewing was finished. All the way down, past the sound of the wheel, past the smell of the flax water, past the last lamp in the last window on the long dark valley road. Good night.